may only read the words that are there. Those plain English words may be understood if we will take the time to stop and think about them. And all power granted to the national government is succinctly defined there, and there is none other power offered. So this is a real danger. And unless and until Americans come to believe and understand this, we are in danger of losing this nation. The Republic is at a danger of being destroyed.
Senator Bennett, I asked him about the oath, and one of his responses to me was, which version of the Constitution have you been studying? And the next time I see him, I want to ask him which version he took his oath to support and uphold.
See, with that kind of mentality, you could take that Constitution and make it mean anything you wanted. And that's tragic. And all too often, those who hold office do exactly that. And that is my firm conviction. I will not vary from the actual plain English words of the United States Constitution. And by the way, if we can document what the meanings of those words are based upon the writings of the Founding Fathers. And if you ever find, and I'm sure that when you talk to Senator Bennett, he probably brought up the Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison debates. Yes. And that's a ludicrous answer. It truly is. And history has proven the validity of Jefferson's and Madison's position and the false position of Hamilton. Because he was able to sway someone to believe him is irrelevant. If you look at what the plain English words said, you can find that Jefferson and Madison were correct. Now, there's the problem then. So people say, well, what do you do if you have founding fathers that disagree? Well, we have a trump card. That trump card is the United States Constitution. It's, well, again, I say, it's plain English words say. And once you've gotten to that point that you're willing to read those, if you have a Hamilton that disagrees with a Madison, you go, wow, let's go look at the Constitution then. And that trumps everybody, because that is the one that was ratified. That is what you take an oath to, and that is what we must run this country under. It is the charter of the nation.
Wouldn't you say that the Founding Fathers, their disagreements would be so far off what is happening today that they would be in total harmony against the stuff that's going on today that's happening in Washington? Wouldn't you say that?
Well, unquestionably, the Founding Fathers were men of honor. They were men of character. And fortunately for us, they were, or else we wouldn't have this marvelous document 223 years later. But the fact of the matter is that, let's just take, for example, you talked about taking property from one and giving it to another. Their statements on private property are absolutely powerful.
So they both agree on that. You don't take one from one and give it to another, no matter what.
In fact, we could give you quotations that specifically say that by, say, John Adams or James Madison, and they talk about liberty being destroyed if that ever comes to pass. And we will lose our liberty if we continue along this socialistic path or this welfare state or whatever people want to call it. But Hamilton, twice in the Federalist Papers, talks about a power over a man's subsistence is a power over the man.
Well, children can understand it if you take their property and force them to give it to another child. And they know that if a group of kids come up and say, hey, the majority rules, we're going to take, they understand that. Why can't adults understand it like children do?
Well, adults are not as guileless as children. And here's the problem with adults. Adults think, wow, maybe I can get more than I'm giving away. And so that's what happens with these social earmarks that happen, where a senator's buying votes back home by bringing home the bacon, if you will. And so what the people back home do is they say, wow, he got us rapid transit or whatever. The fact of the matter is, by that earmark, he took money from people in Dallas and Chicago and LA and New York and everywhere else to give something to, say, Salt Lake City. But he also, you need to realize that stuff was taken out of your pocket to give to people in Dallas and Chicago and LA and so on and so forth too. The problem is, everybody's just buying votes with those kinds of things. And this needs to stop. We need to go back. There is not a shred of evidence within the Constitution of the United States that there's allowed any redistribution of wealth. I don't care if it's foreign powers. I don't care if it's corporate moguls. I don't care if it's states or if it's counties or municipalities or even people, just individuals. There is no power granted within the Constitution to allow the redistribution of wealth. And we need to go back to that.
I might know an exception to that.
Well, let's hear it.
In 1913, as you know, three horrible things happened. The 16th Amendment, the 17th Amendment, and the Federal Reserve Act. And since 1913, the Federal Reserve, a private corporation, has been receiving trillions of dollars. Maybe we could get that back and redistribute it amongst the taxpayers that paid into it. What do you think?
I think that the 1913 was a very bad year for this nation. There's no question about that. And as you point out, the 16th, 17th Amendments are absolute, they've strayed far from the founding intent of the Founding Fathers. But then with the Federal Reserve Act, they created a private banking consortium from which the Congress can always borrow money. They never say no, but what they do is they create the money out of thin air, put it on as a entry in their books by saying we've lent the United States this amount of money. They charge us interest for it, and it's gone on.
And then we pay it back to them, and they get to keep it. Right?
Well, that's right. It goes into their coffers, but we haven't paid it back yet. We just keep paying the interest. And
that's still a lot of profit, the interest.
Absolutely. They love that. In fact, credit card companies would love it if you never paid your credit card off, because if you just kept paying the interest every month, well, they've got a huge income, and then it's never going to end. And that's exactly what's happening in America. You look at about a third of the American economy, or at least the revenue stream, goes to paying interest nowadays on our debt. So sure. It's terrible.
Well, I asked Senator Hatch, I said, what about the Federal Reserve? And he wasn't quite sure. He said, well, it's a private corporation. Well, then no, it's part of the government. Well, it's a private corporation controlled by the government. I says, well, all that being said, what about the trillions of dollars we're paying as taxpayers? They go to the Treasury, and then it goes to the Federal Reserve. They don't give it back to the Treasury. They keep the trillions. They don't give it back to the Treasury. If the Federal Reserve were part of the government, wouldn't it go back to the Treasury? And he said that's an issue. And he did. I saw he did vote again, or he voted for auditing the Fed. Senator Bennett voted against it.
We do need to audit the Fed. They've watered it down terribly in recent days. The effort in the Senate to basically eviscerate that more clean-cut audit is gaining strength, because the Fed is lobbying very strongly to avoid any sort of audit. And the reason is they don't want Americans to know what's been happening to our dollars and what a stranglehold they have on the U.S. economy. Now, what's really astounding is that a couple of years before George Bush ended his presidency, he attempted to give all control for all finances in the United States to the Federal Reserve. Of course, some of us raised a few eyebrows over that and went about trying to stop it. Well, it wasn't carried out, but under Mr. Obama, this is moving forward in a great, great movement, and it's gaining strength there to ultimately and finally turn all regulation of our finances over to the Federal Reserve. It's gaining strength right now at the national level, rather than diminishing as we'd like it to see.
Yeah, to me it sounds a little ludicrous. It sounds to me like let's get robbed by a bunch of gangsters and then audit them. It's like they should be arrested first and all the property taken and then give them a trial. But
the problem is Congress authorized it. Of course, if you look at this story, there's a great book every American should read. It's by G. Edward Griffin. It's called The Creature from Jekyll Island. And it sounds like some horror movie, and it is a horror movie, but the Federal Reserve was created on Jekyll Island, and it was by a lot of banksters, as some of the people call them, and very powerful people in the United States government. The problem is that most people don't know that it is truly a private consortium that for profit, and American tax dollars feed it very nicely. So people should read that, and it reads, by the way, it's a very thick book. It looks like, boy, it'd be kind of hard to get through, but it's a page turner. It's like a novel. Okay. It's very fun to read.
Great. Well, it seems that people have just completely been deceived with what's happening in America, and we've been robbed from and had our property stolen from us, and we think that it's all right, that it's okay, that it's just a part of business. What do you think we can do as citizens and viewers to become more aware, to help our neighbors become more aware? It reminds me of The Wizard of Oz, the movie The Wizard of Oz. Toto pulled back the curtain, and sure, before then it was all complicated and difficult to understand, but once the curtain was pulled back, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe we don't need to know the mechanics and the technologies behind what we've had stolen from us, but to understand that we've been stolen from.
Well, I think that, as we've talked earlier in this little discussion, Americans cannot be ignorant and free. Americans must, again, relearn these great principles. Read the Constitution. Read it in the tradition of the Founding Fathers, not somebody's weird interpretation of it. Read the Federalist Papers. There is so much written that's so wonderful and so powerful that would help us understand that. And we do have power that the colonists didn't have in 1775 and 76 when they had to have a shooting war. We have the United States Constitution. It still exists. It's in its organic form, and
The oath is still in place.
the oath is still in place. But in addition to that, we also have the ballot box. See, this November, voters could remove every member of the House. The Congress could be completely eliminated. They come up for vote every 2 years. And then this same November, we could get rid of 1/3 of the senators. And then 2 years from then, we could get rid of the whole House again if we wanted to, and another third of the senators, and we could cleanse the executive branch. The issue is we can do this with simply an understanding electorate. And we do not need a revolution. It makes me so worried when I hear people that are frustrated now talk of revolution. We do not need a revolution. We need a restoration. And what needs to happen is we need to have an understanding of what our real strength and power is. Now, there are senators, well, at least candidates now, that are promoting the idea, and you think about this for a second, they're promoting the idea that the Constitution's flawed. They say, oh my goodness, we've got to have an amendment for this or that or the other, or whatever they talk about. The idea, it plants in the minds of the people that, well, maybe the Constitution is not so good after all, because after all, we do have to change it. Let's amend it. Well, the problem's not in the Constitution. The problem is in our lack of applying it. We have abandoned it. We no longer even seem to use it as our foundation. And what needs to happen is we restore that. We go back to that Constitution, and by golly, the problems will be resolved. In fact, I tell people that America was at a crossroads in 1787 when the Constitution was written. The nation was floundering. The wheels were falling off, literally. I mean, whether it's economics or foreign affairs or anything that you could think about. The political arena in 1787 was very toxic. And if anything, we could draw parallels between now and then. But what happened once we got that Constitution ratified, and once it was embraced wholeheartedly and enthusiastically by not only the people but their representatives, the nation suddenly stood up and dusted itself off and walked into what is now our history as the greatest, freest, strongest, most powerful, and most respected nation on earth. And so we have a historical record that says if we will apply these principles, we can go back to that. And America can easily do that if we would simply go back to that original foundation. So that's what I'm encouraging.